everybody, Jason Sherman here. In today's episode of Zero to CEO, I speak with Florida employment lawyer Alberto Naranjo. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. And we're going to be talking about what businesses must know about employment law. So if you're an entrepreneur or a business owner and you're interested in getting into employment law, Alberto is the man to talk to. And what I want to find out first is, because it is such a niche kind of market, what inspired you to specialize in employment law in the first place?
Sure. I consider myself to be a entrepreneur junkie. So I love to see how businesses work, and see the internals, how they work with their employees, how everything kind of is managed. And being an employment attorney gives you a lot of insight into many different businesses, and how they work and how they handle their employees and their policies, their procedures, their workflows. So that's always been something that's caught my attention.
Were you an entrepreneur, or did you work in a certain industry and then you kind of fell into the entrepreneurship hole where you decided to start your own business? Or how did it actually work out where you decided to do that?
Yeah. So my family's always been in businesses. They have bakeries. And then growing up, I always worked in the bakery. I helped to open up one bakery with my father. And then, when I was growing up, I also worked at a lot of nightclubs and opened up my own kind of entertainment business as well there. But then when I got into law school, I did work for a few law firms before, just to get my bearings to figure out how a law firm works. And then when I felt comfortable enough, I went out on my own to open up my own business.
Nice. You had me at bakery because I got a massive sweet tooth problem, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm not stopping. I'm opening up a bakery in the next 6 months as well.
what kind of baked goods do you guys specialize in? Because it's I love baked goods. My God.
Yeah, we're opening up a KO bakery. So it's CAO, and it stands for Cuban American Original.
Nice.
So it's a Cuban themed, but American themed too. So they have a lot of synergy between both cultures, and they have 20 locations, and I'm going to be opening up one of their flagship locations in Miami.
Wow, man! Congratulations. That's another success we have here, right? Baked goods and law all together somehow, right? if somebody needs help at the bakery, you got them covered. So,
yes, sir.
Speaking about helping entrepreneurs along their journeys, what are some of the most common legal mistakes that you see startups and small businesses make potentially when they're hiring someone new?
Definitely. So the first big one is definitely how they pay their employees, right? And a lot of business owners feel that if they have a corporation that they can avoid liability, that they don't have personal liability. But what most people don't know is that there's a law called the FLSA. And if you're not paying your employees correctly under that law, you can also be personally liable for those violations. So even if your company closes down or your company files bankruptcy, they can still go after you in a personal, liabilities. So basically, making sure you're classifying your employees correct. You don't want to make somebody an independent contractor or 1099 just because they ask you that, or because you think it's better for your tax purposes. I always tell people, make them a W-2. If they're working for you full time, they're not working anywhere else. You're going to get a tax benefit because you're paying taxes on that employee. And the government wants to give incentives to companies who are employing people, right? The more a company employs, the more, an individual has kids. It's the same thing with a business. The more kids, the more tax breaks you get. The more employees you get, the more tax breaks you get, right?
Does that pretty much only work with the employees you have that are in the U.S.? Like if you're working with people outside the country, you can't really offer them those 1099s or W-2s, right?
There's different laws that apply abroad. I've seen some. It's a big trend now. There's international payroll companies to make sure you're paying them correctly at the country that they belong in. But what kind of liability are you going to have here in the U.S.? Probably none.
Right.
So it's something you have to look into. I usually like staffing companies. So I'd rather have a staffing company kind of deal with that for you instead of hiring them directly. Or you can use websites like Upwork or something like that. But you got to be careful with that as well. And you got to comply with the laws in their country.
Man, it's a lot to think about, and I've been running a lot of businesses in my career. And, unfortunately, I have to say I haven't really thought much about, hiring and firing and the right kind of ways to treat my employees. But I can say this is that I've always treated my employees with respect, proper pay, and I've always either, treated them as part of like the team, the family, not so much as like some contractor. But
Yeah.
I really haven't really probably followed the right rules the way you're saying. So,
And
what are some of the ways to like avoid the pitfalls? I guess like because you're talking about the things you should do, but how do you actually do the right hiring process and the right rules? Like how do you follow that?
I think you said something that's really important. It's the way you treat people.
Hmm.
Because I've been doing employment law for over 15 years, and people come to my office and they know that there's violations, but they don't want to do anything about it because they felt like they were family to the owner of the company or whatever it is, right? And then there's a lot of people that come to my office that they want blood, right? They
Mm,
want to, start a lawsuit no matter what. And it's because it's the way that they're treated, right?
yeah,
So the way you treat employees is key. But the other thing is just knowing what you should be doing, right? You should be taking proactive steps. If somebody comes to you and is complaining about some sort of discrimination or harassment or retaliation, make sure you at least do an investigation. Document the fact that you took this in, that you looked into it, that you talked to everybody that's involved, and that you took some steps to correct the issue, right?
yeah,
That lowers your liability a ton. Tracking hours, making sure that you're tracking hours and you have a record and you keep that record for at least, 5, 6 years, right? Typically it's up to 7 years, but if you don't have hours that are tracked, someone can come back and say, "Oh, I worked, 1,000 hours a week." But if you have no proof, that's something that I highly recommend is keeping track of the hours that people are working.
okay. Those are good suggestions, and I think well, I know for a fact we do track hours, so that's good. Thank God for that. Whew. Uh, You mentioned something I have never heard of, FLSA wage law. What exactly is that and why is it so important?
Yeah. So it's a civil rights law. It's the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's kind of like an anti-slavery law.
Ooh,
But basically, it's a law that says that sets the minimum wage, right?
okay.
And it also sets the work week. Most people know you work 40 hours a week. If you work more than 40 hours a week, you're owed overtime, time and a
Right.
half. And there's exceptions to all the rules. Lawyers love to make things complicated and have a lot of exceptions. But for the most part, the rule of thumb is, if it's somebody that's not in management, somebody that's not supervising employees, if it's a typical type of worker that's just working on one task and their work is being supervised, they should get paid overtime for time and a half, right? And so the FLSA just says you need to keep records of the hours worked. You need to pay the minimum wage. You need to pay for all the hours worked, right? You can't have people working off the clock a few hours before work, a few
Right.
hours after work. We're not paying them for the work that they do on the weekends and that sort of thing. But it's a very important law for businesses because this is one of the most dangerous laws. And I tell most entrepreneurs, like yourself and a lot of people are saying, you're focused on running the business, right? And you want to make this business work and you put a lot of time into it. You
Yeah.
don't want a little slip up like this close down your business, which has happened a lot of times, unfortunately. So you definitely want to make sure you keep track of the hours and you're paying everybody correctly. I always suggest a payroll company at least. That usually helps somewhat.
Yeah, because as entrepreneurs and even startup founders, which is what our purview is and where we are, is that there is no kind of line between work and personal life when you're running a startup because when you close down for the day and you shut off your computer, you're still thinking about the startup, you're still researching for the startup, you're still coming up with content ideas, and you're still working on that startup, whether it's nighttime or weekends. And you're not really billing for those hours because it's your own time and you decided to do those things, which is how a startup is. You're not mandated like you have to work nights and weekends, but if you do that, it's on your own time. And is that something that's okay, or is that still considered murky waters?
For the owner of the company, we all know that's you got to put in the time, right?
Right.
And for the employees, then yes, that is a little bit murky. times. I mean, I always have a policy that I recommend people to have some written policy that says that they're not allowed to work more than 40 hours unless they have written permission. Um, and again, the FLSA only applies, most employment laws apply to bigger companies. The
Okay,
laws don't want to stifle, growth in the economy.
that makes
So
sense.
the discrimination laws typically apply to companies that have 15 or more employees.
Okay,
Uh, the FLSA applies to companies typically that are grossing, not profiting, but grossing over 500,000 per year, right?
okay. So
There
this is
are
more,
exceptions.
these are scalable companies that are growing and they're starting to hire more people. And that makes a lot more sense.
Correct.
So like for a new startup, it doesn't really apply, but for the larger, more enterprise scaling companies, it makes a lot more sense. I did
Yeah.
notice another abbreviation that I've never seen, and I'm assuming you can explain it to me, is the EEOC. And what is
Yes.
that and how can a business prepare for that?
Yeah. So that's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Okay.
The way I like to explain it is kind of like a police department,
Hmm.
but for businesses, right? So if an employee is having some sort of issue at work when it's related to discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, the employee can file a complaint with the federal government, and the
Wow.
federal government can come in and do an investigation against the company.
Jeez,
Um,
that's not good.
yeah, yeah. The
Let's
one
avoid
pitch
that.
Yeah, yeah. The one pitch I would say is, if you're an entrepreneur, you should consult with an employment attorney if these kind of things happen, even if it's for an hour, or you can even hire somebody to do a third party neutral investigation for you.
Okay.
But it's something that you should at least be aware of. That way, a light bulb pops in your head like, oh, wait a second, there's something I got to do here. And seek, some professional help with that.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're right. I think getting an outside perspective to kind of put things into perspective for you makes a lot of sense. And we talked about there's steps that people can take, mistakes that we've made, how to avoid them, and things like that. But one of the things that I've tried to do, and I might not have done it 100%, but I've tried to at least offer some sort of documentation. We can call it an employee handbook on like the culture of the company, how we run things, where the resources are, who to talk to, chain of command, and like kind of like rules around work-life balance and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you, is I'm assuming it's like a recommendation on your end, is like to have some sort of employee handbook. If so, how would someone go about making one of those?
Yeah, 100%. And what I recommend, or what I always tell people, it's a living document, right? You're never going to get it right the first time. And as problems pop up in the business, you should be making a checklist every year and then going back and editing that handbook once a year. And it could be just, issues you had with an employee that you want to avoid in the future, or there's a new change in the workflow. You found, there's something in the system that's clogging up the work and you want to, unclog that. So you want to update that. But most importantly, you want to have a procedure. There should be a designated person that the employees know that they can reach out to and contact if there's an issue. Usually you don't want it to be the exact supervisor or manager, but you want to have somebody else that handles those kind of situations.
Makes a lot of
Um,
sense.
yeah.
And so, before we wrap up, I want to know if there are maybe some proactive legal moves that every startup could take today to avoid future problems as they grow.
Yeah. Get an audit. You can get an audit
Easy answer.
or yeah, you can get an audit or it could be as simple as having a 1 hour consultation with an attorney.
Okay.
I tell most people, if you can get by me, you're going to get by 90% of your problems, right?
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
You're the
And so
bodyguard at the club.
yeah, exactly. So if you get by me, you're going to be, pretty smooth sailing for the most part. But keeping track with things. If you have a payroll company, they usually send out newsletters. There's podcasts that focus just on employment law. Just keep updated with that kind of stuff, and don't think that just because you have something in writing that's it's going to be good law for the rest of the time.
Right.
In Florida and throughout the United States, we've been seeing one year non-competes are legal, one year they're not legal, then the next year they are
Yeah.
legal. So there's a lot of back and forth with employment law. You want to check in with somebody every few years.
Interesting. And so you said people have to get through you in order to be compliant. So how do they get through to you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
So you can visit our website, floridaemploymentlaw911.com. You can book a call on our website. You can fill out an intake. And we'll set up a time. We could do a Zoom, we could do a Google Meets, we could do a phone call, come to my office. I can even have a lot of clients. I have businesses that I represent, not just employees. I have a corporate client that I've been representing for 4 years. I go to their office and, talk to
Nice.
their employees and that sort of thing.
But can I come to the bakery in Miami, get some baked goods, go to the beach with you, and talk law at the same time? If so, then you might have a
Yes.
customer.
Yes, that's it. We're working on that. I got to stick an office in the back of the bakery. That way we can do both,
Yes,
multitask.
enjoy the coffee and the baked goods while you're doing the law, and you got yourself some deals. All right, guys, check out Florida Employment Law 911.com and get through Alberto to be compliant. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you in the next one.